The ballroom went quiet when the host lifted his glass and said my brother's fiancé had a small request. Then he looked straight at me and smiled like I was staff. "We'll keep tonight, curated," he said, tapping the seating chart. "Some people are better kept private." My father nodded. My mother stared at her clutch. My brother didn't meet my eyes. Around us, strangers in black tie watched like it was normal to erase a person. I stood there holding my coat, waiting for someone to say, "That's enough." No one did. If you want the rest, the first person who taught me that silence could hurt more than cruelty was my father. He was not loud. He did not raise his voice or throw words like weapons. He simply chose comfort over fairness, again and again, in small ways that were easy to ignore if you were not the one being ignored. When I was 12, I was blamed for a mistake my brother made at school. A teacher called our house and my father listened without correcting her. He hung up and told me to apologize to the principal. I stood there, confused, asking why I had to take responsibility for something I did not do. He sighed like I was difficult and said, "Sometimes it's easier to let things pass than make trouble." That was the first time I learned that in our family, peace meant someone else paying the price. It happened again when I was older, when I worked 2 part-time jobs through college while my brother focused on internships that my parents arranged for him. I did not ask for introductions. I just asked that my work be seen. At dinner one night, my mother mentioned my brother's promotion at his firm. I said I had landed my client and my father nodded once, then changed the subject. Later, I asked him why my achievements felt invisible. He looked tired and said, "Your brother needs support more. You're independent. You'll be fine." By the time my brother met the woman who would become his fiancée, I already understood the pattern. If a choice had to be made between protecting appearances and protecting me, appearances would win. My parents were suddenly careful about everything. What they wore. What they said. Who they stood next to. They talked about standards and circles like our family was auditioning for a part in a life they had always watched from a distance. And when I didn't fit the image they wanted to project, they didn't argue with me. They simply rearranged the room so I was no longer visible. The night they decided I would not attend the engagement celebration, my father did not call me into the living room to explain. He spoke to my brother instead, loud enough for me to hear from the hallway. He said it would be better if I stayed home. That I was sensitive. That crowds made me uncomfortable. That it was kinder to protect me from stress. None of that was true, but it sounded reasonable. It made him sound thoughtful instead of afraid. My brother agreed without hesitation. When he came to my door later, he repeated the same words like they were his own. "Dad thinks it's for the best," he said. I nodded, because I knew what arguing would change. Nothing. That was the deepest cut of all. Not that they excluded me, but that they did it with soft language and gentle smiles, like it was an act of care instead of convenience. They chose the version of the story that made them look kind and made me disappear quietly. And in that moment, I understood something I had never put into words before. In our family, love was conditional. You were loved when you were useful to the image. When you were easy. When you did not complicate things. I walked back to my room that night with a strange calm in my chest. It was the calm that comes when you finally stop expecting rescue from people who have shown you, over and over, that they will not step by and by the time I reached my mid-20s, I stopped believing that what happened in that ballroom was an accident. It was just the latest version of something that had been happening my entire life. I was not overlooked because I was invisible. I was overlooked because it was easier for everyone else if I stayed that way. I had always been the one who adjusted. The one who stepped back so other people could feel comfortable stepping forward. When we were kids, my brother was praised for being charming. I was tolerated for being quiet. If he forgot a birthday, it was a mistake. If I forgot, it was a pattern. If he spoke sharply, it was confidence. If I did, it was attitude. Over time, those small differences taught me where I stood. I learned how to soften my voice. How to sit on my words. How to leave rooms before anyone noticed I had been there. The pattern followed me into adulthood. At family gatherings, my parents would introduce my brother with his title and his future. Then they would gesture vaguely toward me and say, "She does something with computers." They never asked for details. They never asked if I was tired. They never asked if I was proud of myself. They just assumed I would manage. And I did. I managed my expectations. I managed my feelings. I managed my place. Even when my brother's engagement was announced, the way my parents spoke made everything clear. They said this marriage was a turning point for our family. A chance to finally be seen by the right people. They talked about legacy and connections. They talked about doors opening. And when they looked at me, they did not see someone who could help hold those doors open. They saw someone who might trip on the threshold. What hurt most was not the decision to keep me away from the celebration. It was how natural that decision felt to them. There was no debate. No moment of doubt. No conversation about fairness. It was simply understood that if someone had to be uncomfortable, it would be me. I was the one who could handle it. I always had. That night after my brother told me to stay home, I sat on the edge of my bed and realized something quietly devastating. I had spent my whole life trying to earn a place that had never been offered. I had worked harder, stayed quieter, asked for less. And none of it changed the role I was given. I was not the daughter they bragged about. I was the one they managed. From that point on, I stopped telling them about my wins. When I landed new clients, I did not call home. When my income grew, I did not celebrate with them. I built my life in a separate lane, one they barely noticed because it did not fit the story they liked to tell about our family. They were busy polishing the version of themselves they wanted the world to see. I was busy becoming someone they no longer controlled. Looking back, I can see how clear the pattern was. I was not excluded because I failed them. I was excluded because I threatened the balance they had created. My independence made their favoritism harder to justify. My success made their silence look deliberate. So they chose the easier path. They chose to keep me small in their narrative so they could stay comfortable in their own. I finally saw my role clearly, and it hurt deeply. The moment I stopped asking for belonging did not come with anger. It came with clarity. It happened on a Tuesday afternoon in my office, when my brother called to tell me the guest list for the engagement gala had been finalized. He spoke like he was sharing good news, listing names I did not recognize. Donors. Board members. Friends of her family. Then he paused and said my name carefully, like it was fragile. He said there had been a change. That the room was tighter than expected. That it would be easier if I didn't come after all. I listened without interrupting. I let him explain how it was not personal. How everyone loved me. How this was just timing. How I would understand. I watched the light on my desk shift as he talked, the dust floating in it like tiny witnesses to a moment that should have felt dramatic but didn't. When he finally stopped, waiting for me to argue or plead, I realized something inside me had gone quiet. The part of me that still hoped they would choose me had gone still. I told him it was fine. I meant it in a way I had never meant it before. Not the fine that hides disappointment. The fine that accepts reality. I hung up and stared at the wall for a long time, not crying, not angry, just aware. A boundary had been crossed, and I did not need to announce it for it to be real. They had decided my presence was a liability. I decided their approval was no longer necessary. That afternoon I opened a new document and changed the way I worked. For years, I had kept my consulting quiet, almost secret, as if success might provoke resentment at home. I stopped doing that. I updated my business profile. I added my name to projects I had previously kept anonymous. I allowed clients to mention me in case studies instead of hiding behind generic titles. It was not revenge. It was alignment. If I was going to build something, it would carry my name. When the engagement weekend came, I stayed in my own city. I worked. I met with 2 clients and signed a contract that would shape the next phase of my career. That night, I did not watch the videos my family sent from the party. I turned my phone face down and went for a long walk instead. I felt lighter than I expected. Not because I had been invited somewhere better, but because I had finally stopped waiting for invitations that were never meant for me. I understood then that boundaries do not always come with speeches. Sometimes they come quietly, in the way you stop explaining yourself. In the way you stop shrinking to fit a space that was never designed to hold you. I did not confront my parents. I did not correct my brother. I simply stepped out of the role they had written for me. I chose to belong to my own life instead. That was the day I stopped asking to be seen. And the day I started seeing myself. I did not announce this shift to anyone. There was no speech, no dramatic exit, no final argument at the dinner table. It was simply a quiet decision that changed everything after it. From that point forward, I measured my worth by my own standards. I stopped translating myself into versions they found easier to accept. And in that silence, I finally felt steady for the first time. I did not confront them. I did not write letters or demand apologies. I simply stepped back and let time do what arguments never could. When I stopped showing up to manage their feelings, small cracks began to appear in the story they told about our family. My parents noticed first. Without me smoothing conversations or absorbing tension, gatherings felt sharper. My absence became louder than my presence ever was. The consequences came quietly. The firm my brother worked for started asking about the consulting partner who had helped his future in-laws stabilize their resorts. He smiled and took credit by association, but questions followed that he could not answer. When the Harringtons spoke publicly about the turnaround, they mentioned my name. Not dramatically. Just clearly. It was printed in programs and case studies. My parents saw it before they heard it. They learned who I was from strangers. By the time the engagement gala arrived, I was no longer attending as family. I was there as a professional. I walked in early and stood near the wall where my work was framed. I watched my parents enter later with the careful pride they always carried in places that felt expensive. They did not see me at first. They saw the plaque. They read my name. Then they saw me standing beneath it. No one raised a voice. No one made a scene. The room did not need one. The truth did the work on its own. After that night, things shifted in ways no apology could have achieved. My mother began asking questions she had never asked before. Not out of guilt. Out of confusion. My father grew quieter, less certain of the stories he used to tell about what mattered. My brother avoided the subject entirely. He could not reconcile the version of me he had dismissed with the one his new world now respected. And I did not help him bridge that gap. I kept my distance. Not as punishment. As protection. I declined invitations that felt performative. I answered calls when they were honest. I stopped explaining myself to people who had already decided who I was. Slowly, the power dynamic changed. Not because I demanded it. Because I no longer depended on it. The reputation they once tried to manage began to manage them. Friends asked why I had not been included sooner. Colleagues asked why they had never mentioned my work. Every question forced a small reckoning they could not avoid. They learned that silence has a cost when the person you silenced succeeds anyway. There was no moment of victory. No speech. No final scene. Just a calm realization that I had outgrown the space where I was once diminished. I built a life that did not require their approval. I found peace in rooms where no one needed me to be smaller. Now, when I see my parents, we talk politely. When I see my brother, we talk carefully. The distance is not cold. It is clear. I am no longer waiting to be chosen. I am choosing myself every day, and that is enough. I do not hate them. I do not need to. Time has done the work that anger never could. I learned that dignity grows in quiet choices, in showing up for myself when others chose comfort over courage. If they ever understand that, it will be on their own schedule. Until then, I move forward with steadier steps, carrying nothing but clarity, and leaving the rest where it belongs. That is the life I finally chose.